Good evening, America. Welcome back to EAE News. Tonight, we have a special segment sponsored by our very own producer, Kent Bailey. As we begin to close out the 2021 school year, we would like to reflect on our most influential moments throughout the world from the past 6 months. Over to you, Abby.
Thank you, Emily. Tonight we will be covering the good, the bad, and even the ugly. In this recap, we will be dividing it up by region throughout the fall, winter, and spring. The Americas will be presented by Ellery, Europe and Africa presented by Emily, and Asia and Australia presented by yours truly, me. Take it away, Ellery.
Alright, thanks Abby. First we got here in the fall what was happening in the Americas. In October we have the FBI charged 13 men with plotting to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer and storm the Michigan Capitol. We believe that this is due to the governor's strict restrictions in the state regarding COVID-19. On October 12th, 5 men playing dominoes in an El Salvador bar were shot and killed. Another man was fatally shot after trying to escape the gunfire. Police believe the 3 men were involved in the attack, with 1 currently in custody. At least 13 people died on October 12th due to the violence in El Salvador. On November 3rd, Hurricane Eta makes landfall in Nicaragua as a Category 4 storm with winds up to 140 kilometers, killing at least 235 people across Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, and Panama. November 15th, SpaceX Falcon 9 launches its first regular flight to International Space Station with 4 astronauts. And that's all we have for the Americas regarding the fall season. Emily, take it away.
Thanks, Ellery. Moving on over to Europe and Africa, here's some key events for this fall. On October 8th, mass protests emerged in Nigeria after weeks of rising tensions surrounding police brutality. Lately, the Special Anti-Robbery Squad has been accused of kidnapping, harassment, and extortion. Many Nigerian celebrities are joining the protests and calling attention to them online. On October 13th, it was reported that at least 10 people have died during the police brutality protests in Nigeria. It was reported that these people had been killed by Nigerian police. Since the protests started last week, the SARS unit has been disabled. Moving on over to Poland, on October 23rd, an abortion ruling led to a nationwide protest. The controversial ruling banned nearly all abortions except for those in the case of rape, incest, or the risk to the mother's health. The country had already had strict abortion laws, with many believing women were already obtaining abortions either illegally or abroad. As protesters clashed with the police, pepper spray was deployed and physical force was used. Moving into Ethiopia, on November 14th, rebellious leaders from the Ethiopia's Tigray area launched missiles against Eritrea's capital of Asmara. The attack marked significant rise in tensions as the 2 areas entered their 12th day of conflict. Another 2 missiles were launched at an airport, and Ethiopia's prime minister launched the military forces after a Tigrayan attack on the federal troops earlier this month. On Monday the 16th, Eritrea claimed to have captured another Tigray town. Hundreds of people have died from this conflict, and at least 20,000 refugees have fled to Sudan. On November 18th, Ethiopia issued 76 arrest warrants for army officers accused of being members of the Tigray People's Liberation Front. As the areas continue to clash, Ethiopia's prime minister said he's moving on into Tigray. On November 20th, aid agencies stated that they were unable to reach civilians and called for a ceasefire in the area to provide necessary aid. Over to you, Abby.
Thank you, Emily. Next, I'll be covering Asia and Australia. On October 7th, protesters and vigilante groups violently clashed during protests in Kyrgyzstan. The protests began after parliamentary election results were released, electing opposition leader Sardar Zaparov, who was freed from prison earlier in the week. On October 16th, pro-democracy protests in Thailand entered their 3rd night. Amidst the protests, 2 men were arrested for attacking Queen Sathira's motorcade. On October 14th, the motorcade drove through the protests, and many protesters held up 3 fingers salute from the Hunger Games trilogy. Many of the protesters have also been chanting and jeering at police to highlight their rights. Back to you, Ellery.
Thanks, Abby. Now moving on to winter. Grab your coats, everyone. Here we go. On December 7th, President Donald Trump orders about 700 troops to be withdrawn from Somalia. And on December 30th, Argentina is the first major Latin American country to legalize abortion. In January, supporters of President Donald Trump stormed the U.S. Capitol in Washington during congressional certification of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's win, resulting in 5 deaths and prompting an evacuation of lawmakers and Vice President Mike Pence. The following days, President Trump has been impeached by the U.S. House of Representatives, voting 232 to 197 for incitement of insurrection. This has been the first time in U.S. history that a president has been impeached twice. On February 15th, a major winter storm in the U.S. stretches from Texas to Maine, killing at least 31, with over 3 million without power in Texas. The following day, Dallas records its lowest temperature in 70 years, -2 degrees Fahrenheit. On February 11th, funding for the Mexican border wall has been overturned by U.S. President Joe Biden. The previous funding was issued by Donald Trump as part of a national emergency order. Next, going over to you, Emily.
Thank you, Ellery. Despite moving into the winter season, you will not need your coats for where we're headed next. On December 19th, Nigeria announced that 344 Nigerian schoolboys were rescued after being kidnapped by bandits pretending to be the terrorist group Boko Haram. The boys were kidnapped December 11th and told tales of abuse, torture, and starving for 2 days. Glad they're home safe. In Ethiopia, on December 16th, the United Nations warned that millions of children are still cut off from the aid in the Tigray region, which has had conflicts for the past month. An estimated 2.3 million minors are cut off from basic humanitarian rights such as water, vaccines, sanitation supplies, and medicine. Going west into Niger, on January 2nd, at least 100 people were killed after an attack on 2 Niger villages. Security footage shows the villages being raided by suspected Islamic terrorists. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack, though. On January 15th, at least 100 protesters were arrested after protesting the death of a man in Brussels. The man died after becoming unconscious shortly after being taken into custody at a police station. Hundreds of protesters flooded the streets of Brussels, throwing stones and projectiles at the police, who in turn used a water cannon. Responding to the protests, officials have said that the 23-year-old's death is being investigated.
Thank you, Emily. Going into Asia and Australia, on December 7th, over 300 people were hospitalized with a mystery illness in India, one of whom has died. The people were committed with seizures, unconsciousness, and nausea. Every patient tested negative for coronavirus and other mosquito-borne illnesses, so authorities are testing water systems in the area. That same day, much of India shut down after thousands of farmers protested a new farming reform. The protest, which calls for a nationwide strike, has been happening for at least 12 days. On December 28th, after failing to meet a deadline for the 2021-2022 budget, Israel's government collapsed. The country will now face its 4th election in the last 2 years, which is expected to begin in March. The last 3 elections were inclusive, and with the pandemic causing much stress, Netanyahu and Gantz agreed to join forces as a coalition government. Unfortunately, the two have not seen eye to eye, causing the collapse and the need for another election. On January 9th, Kim Jong-un announced that North Korea is in the midst of developing new weaponry, which includes a nuclear-powered submarine, tactical nuclear weapons, and warheads designed to get through missile defense systems. This announcement comes despite the U.S.'s effort to stop the development of these weapons. On January 20th, the U.S. officially accused China of genocide against Uyghur Muslims. The call comes from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on the last full day of the Trump administration. The U.S. has confirmed that at least 2 million Uyghur Muslims and more members of minority Muslim groups have been detained and placed into internment camps. China has denied all claims, but the US continues to stick to its claim. On February 1st, Myanmar's military seized power in a coup, which led to the detainment of civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi and other government officials. In a statement, the military announced that the power was handed to the commander-in-chief and the country is declaring a year-long state of emergency. Many state ministers, as well as Suu Kyi, are being held in the capital. Tensions have been rising between the powerful military and the civilian government since 2015. To you, Ellery.
Thanks, Abby. As we begin to conclude with our segment, we'll be finishing up with the spring season. On March 16th, a gunman shoots and kills 8 people at 3 different spas in Atlanta, Georgia. This case is an ongoing investigation, but outsiders look at it as racially motivated. On April 2nd, a new study suggests the asteroid that wiped out dinosaurs 66 million years ago created South America's tropical rainforests. On April 20th, former police officer Derek Chauvin is convicted of the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, in a case that prompted huge nationwide racial justice protests. On May 4th, Mexico's president, Andres Manuel López Obrador, makes a historic apology to the Maya people for abuses against them in the 5 centuries since the Spanish conquest. On May 6th, an armed police raid on drug traffickers kills 25 in city's deadliest ever in favor of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And that's all for the Americas. Over to you, Emily.
Thanks, Ellery. To close out tonight's segment for Europe and Africa, we will begin in Tanzania. On March 17th, it was reported that the President John Magufuli died at the age of 61. Magufuli had not been seen for weeks and succumbed to a heart issue which he had faced for 10 years. The Vice President, Samia Suluhu Hassan, will be sworn into office at a later date as Magufuli's replacement, making Hassan the first female president in Tanzania. On March 4th, Italy invoked EU powers to halt the shipment of 250,000 COVID-19 vaccines to Australia. The move comes after tensions between European countries and AstraZeneca continues to rise. On April 9th, a wave of sad news fell over the United Kingdom as the royal family announced that Prince Philip, consort of Queen Elizabeth, had unfortunately passed away. The Duke of Edinburgh was 99 years old, the nation's longest-serving consort, and married to Queen Elizabeth for 73 years. The royal family was in mourning for the next 30 days. We wish them the best. On April 9th, after a week of protests, violence in Northern Ireland increased. Unionists have taken into the streets of the Brexit-related protests and protests regarding the decision made to not prosecute leaders of the Irish Nationalist Party. On May 19th, CNN reported that Ethiopian soldiers armed with machine guns, grenades, and snipers raided hospitals in Tigray. Both troops are blocking humanitarian aid from reaching those in need. The raid contaminated various rooms and stopped any procedures from happening at all. On May 2nd, at least 354 protesters were arrested on May Day in Berlin. The protests occurred during the area's Labor Day and left at least 93 police officers injured. City officials have stated that the protests were not spurred by political reasons. The same day, a recent tax reform led to protests that 1 policeman and 5 civilians dead. And for our final region tonight, we have Abby catching us up to the present in Palestine, where she's live covering the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Abby, how are you holding up?
Thank you, Emily. I'm doing okay. Reporting live from Palestine. On May 10th, Israel launched airstrikes against the Gaza Strip, killing at least 20 people. The strike was performed after rockets were shot at Jerusalem from the Gaza area. The rockets caused Israel's parliament to evacuate and sirens to sound. Tensions between Israel and Palestine have risen in recent days. On May 12th, at least 35 people were killed in another airstrike against Gaza. The areas have been ramping up airstrikes as Gaza continues to launch rockets. Over the past few days, 200 civilians have been injured. On May 15th, another 10 Palestinians died after Israeli forces clashed with civilians near the West Bank. Palestinians are being targeted with rubber bullets, tear gas, and live ammunition. Over 500 Palestinians have been targeted since this attack started. Israel's prime minister has vowed to continue to forcefully respond to all of Gaza's rocket attacks. On May 17th, the conflict between Israel and Palestine reached its deadliest day yet, as 43 people were killed by a new airstrike and 50 more wounded. Gaza launched 100 rockets towards Israel, leading Israel to bomb the house of Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas. Reports claim Sinwar is uninjured. Israel continues to launch airstrikes, bringing the total death toll to 197 Palestinians. Rescue teams continue to search the rebel. On May 19th, celebrations erupted after Israel-Hamas ceasefire was reached, but shortly after, airstrikes and rocket launches continued. Schools in Hamas Gaza have been turned into shelters, which could lead to them being super spreaders of the COVID-19 virus. President Biden gave Prime Minister Netanyahu a deadline call for de-escalation measures. On May 22nd, the ceasefire was officially put into effect and aid reached Gaza finally. More than 250 people have been killed in the last 11 days. Thank you for listening to my final segment of Asia and Australia.
Our team here at AAE News would like to thank you for taking the time out of your night to watch our special edition year recap.
We would also like to give additional thanks to our producer, Kent Bailey, for making this happen.
Until next time, good night, America.
Good night.
Good night.